Hey everyone, this is James here from Italian Poliziotteschi and Jolly Reviews. Today going to be reviewing another Poliziotteschi. This one is the Big Racket. This is from 1976, directed by Enzo Castellari, starring Fabio Testi. This is pure genre goodness. Why am I reviewing this film? Well, I actually had a good excuse to rewatch it recently. I think this is something like the third or the fourth time I've seen it. I was a guest on the Subjective Perspective Collective, so go ahead, check out Darren and Dirk's channel over there. They're doing live streams. It was a lot of fun to appear on that show. We reviewed Fear Over the City, Calling All Police Cars, and this film, The Big Racket, which was, quite a lineup. And I think 2 out of 3 in particular are really, really solid films, and the third one is a fun one too. So I strongly recommend people go check that out and check out their channel. They're doing lots of interesting stuff. Probably a little more focused on the jolly as far as Italian genre films go, and kind of Italian horror and those sorts of things. But they have a lot of cool plans. I am probably one of the small potato guests that they have. They had Troy Howarth on, so one of kind of the more larger figures as far as the people generating discourse and whatnot. I mean, he's the author of a couple of different jolly books. So anyways, let's get back to the film. In my opinion, this film is certainly in contention and would probably be my personal pick for the best action Poliziotteschi. And that's not to say to demean other films or put down other films. I think there are a lot of other ones here. But the things that this action is presenting, I think, really do stand out quite a bit. And I think it's almost like in its own lane as far as kind of the types of action and things like that. It's very difficult to compare this versus something like Italian Connection, which has that really amazing chase scene with, what's his name, Mario Adorf going through the streets of Milan. And the action is just of a little bit of different nature, but we'll get into that in just a second. Should and why to watch this film? You should absolutely watch this film. This film is an absolute delight. It is cinematic, stylish, and entertaining as hell. I think for action fans, this is probably a good gateway into the film. I think Castellari shoots his action pretty differently than the other people. I think a lot of the other ones are kind of going more into, I would say, the more kind of realist style presented by something like French Connection, where Friedkin is just using the hell out of those locations. These Italian Poliziotteschi are also really good about using locations and things like that. But I think Castellari, and in particular this film, stand out a bit. In fact, the action, I would argue, feels fairly different. And I was thinking about this really hard, especially after filming that episode with Subjective Perspective Collective. And for me, at least, this film and the action here, there's an exuberance to it. It's really a joy to watch. You have things exploding. You have people jumping. It's like a stuntman's delight. And in that sense, it really reminds me a lot of the later era of action films that would come out of Hong Kong in the 1980s and 90s. And I've argued in the past that Castellari is the most Hong Kong-y of the directors working, and I think to some extent that's true. You could definitely see him as kind of like the through line between someone like Sam Peckinpah, who stylized violence in a way that I think is certainly very influential to Enzo Castellari, particularly the use of slow motion and destruction and things like that, through John Woo, who usually you're going to skip over that Castellari part. And I don't know that John Woo was necessarily inspired by Castellari, but I will say that they do a lot of similar things in terms of styles. They have very similar strengths as directors. They're very good at crafting like these violent action images that are often very, very beautiful. So yeah, I would argue that his films feel a little different, and I think Big Racket is the one that feels the most kind of Enzo Castellari. High Crime and Street Law, they have elements of kind of that dirty, gritty, location-filled violence that you're going to have in your kind of Fernando De Leo films or your Umberto Lindsay films. But Big Racket is probably the most joy-to-watch action film that I like from this era. In fact, it feels a lot like The Righting Wrongs, the classic that came out of Hong Kong, 1986, 1987, in the sense that like there's an exuberance and there's a fun to the action that's happening, but the plot of it is actually quite dark, which is, I think, definitely true for this film. I was brought in kind of just rewatching the film. I was like, oh my god, they're going to some pretty dark places. We have multiple sexual assaults. There is a lot of nastiness going on as far as like the villains in this. It's a really, really nasty racketeering mob, and it doesn't pull its punches whatsoever. Nonetheless, I think the way it shoots action and stuff like that kind of creates a different feel. So you have sort of like this tonal mismatch going on, and I don't say that as an insult because I love both this film and Righting Wrongs. And in my opinion, this is definitely one of kind of the genre classic Poliziotteschi's that everyone should definitely check out. Maybe not everyone's going to love it. Some people might have problems with some of the dark stuff that happens that hasn't necessarily aged great, but I think despite the tonal mismatch, it works very well. So your basic plot just covers this racketeering mob, basically kind of extorting local businesses. What I really like about the way that they create this mob is it's very clever. The mob is very creative in how they do stuff. They use the system against the people there. It fits well with kind of the theme, where they're calling the cops very strategically, things like that. They're almost better at using the system than the cops are themselves. So someone like Fabio Testi, who's playing the lead here. I will say that the plot is fairly basic. It moves along pretty well. Eventually, it kind of morphs into this Dirty Dozen style, but more revenge-motivated plot, where we get... So over the course of the action, while we're seeing the racketeering mob do the nasty business, and Fabio Testi's trying and failing to stop them, we do get introduced to a couple different characters that do end up kind of taking place in this Dirty Dozen style finale that the plot is constantly building up to. And I would say this is one of those films where the plot services the set pieces. The set pieces, for me, are the highlight. And perhaps that's another way that this film stands out as far as like kind of this era of Italian genre cinema. Oftentimes, you would say the same about someone like Dario Argento, whose strengths aren't necessarily in crafting a super propulsive or amazingly put together narrative or great dialogue or anything like that. But he is really, really good about creating these stories that serve the set pieces and the often amazing set pieces that he's doing very, very well. You could say the same thing about John Woo. These are not like super balanced filmmakers that have everything perfectly composed, but they do have some incredible strengths that even the weaker elements of the film help to kind of put together and to serve. For me, at least, this film has something like 3 or 4 set pieces that would definitely be the concluding set piece for just about any other film of the era. They're very show-stopping ones, and I just find them a consistent joy to watch. Fabio Testi is really well cast here. In the episode with Subjective Perspective Collective, we talked a bit about Testi, and at one point I think I did say that he was a little limited in as far as range. And they actually pointed out correctly, in my opinion, that he is actually has more range than you'd think. In something like Solange, he's good at playing sort of like this half skeezy character that's very, very different from the kind of like Dirty Harry style cop that he plays here. While I will argue that I think he's best suited, his best roles that he has are as sort of like these big action heroes. And you can tell just from the body type that this is like a big guy. Franco Nero, probably, I think most people would agree, is a better actor than Fabio Testi. Nevertheless, I think if you're creating an action hero, I think that's very, very debatable. He's just really, really good here. Another great showcase for him is another film that I've talked about in the past, Heroin Busters, kind of solidifying that sort of deep red connection there with David Hemmings. In terms of soundtrack, even this one reminds you that we're in a little bit of a different place. When in that Subjective Perspective Collective episode, we talked a bit about Fear Over the City. That one has a Morricone soundtrack, and this soundtrack couldn't be more different. It's clearly kind of in the prog rock vein, sort of like Goblin, done by the DeAngelis brothers, and the film just opens straight into it. We're putting this music on. It's totally different from kind of that more classical style music that you're getting from a lot of the Italian Poliziotteschi and Gialli at the time. And it feels very much kind of the DeAngelis brothers and Goblin. I would say the DeAngelis brothers perhaps have a greater breadth of work than Goblin, even though Goblin has a few more of the memorable soundtracks. But it's really, really good. Heroin Busters, watch that film if you want to see what Goblin does with the Castellari film. And then it's paired with kind of like these really striking images of very red. Castellari is great with just explosions, things going on fire. In that sense, he reminds me a lot of John Woo, just with those things and the slow-mo and whatnot. Yeah, so just going through a couple additional points that help this film. This film also has a great use of all the different faces of kind of Poliziotteschi at the time. You have a great Vincent Gardenia role coming over from America playing Pepe, kind of a gentleman-like thief. You have Renzo Palmer, who is always great. He's particularly striking here, super intense role. And then you have coming off the bench, even though he has no backstory whatsoever, the Castellari favorite Romano Pupi, or Pupi Romano, who is kind of one of those stuntman type guys. And I get the feeling that Castellari is like a stuntman's best friend as far as directors go. He just does a great job at like just people getting thrown back. I feel like if this was Hong Kong in the 80s, people would have like wire pulls, so they'd be getting jerked back way more. Instead, you more have the stuntmen jumping back, getting shot, things like that, and just composing the different images. He, in the past, has said that his favorite set piece that he's done in his career is the final set piece that takes place in kind of a warehouse, and this is the sort of Dirty Dozen style one that I was talking about. I would argue that it's not even the best set piece of the film. For me, at least, my favorite is the middle one, where we have Testi setting up kind of a sting operation on these criminals, and then little does he know that the criminals are one step ahead of him and are actually setting up the cops for there. And so it introduces a bunch of different things in the course of this thing. We get introduced also to one of the people that would eventually take place in the finale, a skeet shooter who just randomly happens upon the scene. And this is a good example of stuff that just a ton of fun to watch. It's like all of a sudden you have the skeet shooter jumping into the middle of the action, helping the police coming off of the bench. And it's just a great idea. And I feel like this whole film is full of cleverness and things like that. In fact, I think that is what I would argue makes this film feel a little less, it blunts the blows of the darkness, of the different sexual assaults, of just the general meanness of the plot going on. The fact that it is so over the top and so ridiculous, it's almost is like this, takes this mythological status, sort of like spaghetti westerns. In that sense, I think this film feels very much kind of in the vein of Western stories where we have like a hero struggling against kind of like this big gang that's sort of bullying the local people, the local village, and things like that. So I think the Poliziotteschi generally regarded as the spiritual successor to the spaghetti westerns, and I think this film shows it very well. Okay, so last of all, I think this film, it's great. I would highly recommend everyone watch it. It's a ton of fun. It's exhilarating to watch. I will say it's a little more front-loaded as far as the cruelty goes before it gets into a lot of the different set pieces and things like that, but I think it really kind of earns those things. Just all kinds of different fun stuff going on in this film. I will give this film a 9 out of 10. I've come up on it slowly over the years, and for me at least, I know exactly what this film is, and I know what I'm getting when I watch it. So I really love this film. I strongly recommend people check out The Big Racket. Is it my top Poliziotteschi? Probably not quite, but it's definitely in like the top 5 to 10 when I'm talking about these films. And yeah, I'm curious to hear what other people think of the action. I would definitely argue that it's not quite as like exhausting and as intense as something like French Connection or Italian Connection, and it's more fun. And so that is what The Big Racket is for me. It's just a really, really fun, good time. Okay, so thank you all for tuning in. Go check out that episode on Subjective Perspective Collective and let me know what you think of The Big Racket. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.